I took the job because I was running out of options. That's the honest version, not the version I told people afterward, not the version I put on paperwork. The truth was simpler. My divorce had emptied most of my savings. My apartment lease had increased. My truck needed transmission work. And at 39 years old, I found myself applying for jobs I'd never imagined wanting. The flood control facility sat nearly 40 miles outside the nearest town. A collection of concrete structures spread across a river basin in western Kansas. Most people didn't even know it existed. Officially, its purpose was managing seasonal overflow and maintaining a network of diversion channels built decades ago. Unofficially, nobody seemed entirely sure what half the buildings were for anymore. The place had expanded over generations. New construction layered over old construction. Modern systems attached to infrastructure built by people who were long dead. My position was straightforward. Night maintenance, 12-hour shifts, 6 p.m. until 6 a.m. Mostly inspections, equipment checks, pump monitoring, routine repairs. Nothing exciting. The pay was good enough that I stopped asking questions. The first week passed normally. The facility was enormous. Miles of service corridors, storage buildings, control rooms, underground access routes. Most nights I walked 10 or 12 miles without realizing it. I actually liked the work. It kept my mind occupied. After the divorce, silence had become difficult. An empty apartment gives you too much time to think. A job like this leaves you too tired. That suited me fine. The first strange thing happened on my 8th shift. I was replacing a pressure sensor inside Sector C. Nothing complicated. About 20 minutes of work. When I finished, I noticed a steel door at the end of the corridor. Heavy, industrial, painted gray. The unusual thing wasn't the door itself. It was the lock. 3 separate locking mechanisms, a heavy chain, and a welded steel plate covering the handle. It looked less like a secured room and more like something intentionally abandoned. I mentioned it during lunch. Nobody answered. At first I thought they hadn't heard me. Then I noticed every person at the table had stopped eating. Just for a second. 1 second. Then everyone continued as normal. Conversation resumed. Nobody acknowledged the question. The moment stood out because it felt rehearsed. Not planned. Conditioned. Like I'd accidentally touched a hot stove and everyone instinctively pulled away. I asked again. A technician named Harris finally looked up. Legacy room. What's that mean? He shrugged. Nothing you need. That was the entire explanation. Legacy room. Nothing you need. The next few weeks introduced me to more of them. Not just one sealed chamber. Several. Different buildings. Different sectors. All secured similarly. Heavy locks. Chains. Permanent closure notices. No labels explaining their purpose. The facility maps didn't show them either, which bothered me. Maintenance maps showed everything. Electrical rooms. Storage closets. Emergency exits. But these chambers simply didn't exist on official layouts. That curiosity probably would have faded eventually. Then I found a door that wasn't supposed to be there. And everything changed. It happened during a storm. Heavy rain. Strong wind. The kind of night where water hammers every surface for hours. A pump alarm triggered near midnight. Sector F. Lower level. I grabbed my tools and headed underground. The corridor leading toward the alarm was familiar. I'd walked it dozens of times. Concrete walls. Exposed piping. Yellow safety lights every 30 feet. Routine. Predictable. Until it wasn't. Halfway down the passage, I stopped. There was a door ahead. Gray steel. No markings. No window. I'd never seen it before. The problem wasn't memory. I knew that corridor. The wall had always been continuous. No doorway. No alcove. Nothing. Now a door existed. I actually turned around and retraced my steps. Thought maybe I was in the wrong section. I wasn't. Everything else matched perfectly. Only the door was new. I took a photograph. Then another. Then I reported the issue. The response came faster than expected. 2 supervisors arrived within 15 minutes. They didn't inspect the door. They didn't ask questions. They simply escorted me away. The next night, the door was gone. Not removed. Gone. The wall was solid concrete again. No repair marks. No evidence anything had ever existed there. I show my supervisor the photographs. He studied them carefully, then asked me a question that still bothers me. "Did you open it?" I said no. He visibly relaxed. That reaction frightened me more than the disappearing doorway, because it suggested there had been a correct answer, and I'd accidentally given it. From that point forward, people started watching me differently. Not openly, subtly. Conversations stopped when I approached. Assignments changed. Supervisors checked my routes more often. It felt like I had become part of a problem nobody wanted to discuss. Then the maps started changing. Not digital maps, paper ones. The facility maintained printed emergency layouts throughout the property. One night, I noticed an access tunnel marked near Sector D. I'd never seen it before. The following week, the tunnel vanished from the map, then appeared elsewhere. At first, I assumed revisions were occurring. Construction changes happened constantly, except the dates didn't make sense. Some versions were decades old. Archive copies showed the same inconsistencies. Corridors moved. Rooms shifted. Entire sections appeared and disappeared. The facility wasn't simply expanding. Its history seemed unstable. And whenever I traced the changes, they always connected back to the legacy rooms. Every single time, the deeper I dug, the stranger the records became. Because eventually I found maintenance reports describing rooms that physically could not fit inside the structures that supposedly contained them. Measurements contradicted architecture. Blueprints contradicted measurements. Inspection records contradicted both. The numbers never aligned. It was like someone had forced additional space into buildings never designed to hold it. Then came the first missing worker. Or maybe he wasn't the first, just the first I noticed. A contractor named Blake. Quiet guy. Worked electrical maintenance. Saw him regularly. Shared coffee with him several times. Then one morning he wasn't there. Nothing unusual. People quit jobs. Contracts end. Life moves on. Except when I asked about him, nobody knew who I meant. Not forgot. Didn't know. His name wasn't in payroll. Not in schedules. Not in employee records. The photos from a company barbecue changed too. I checked. Blake had been standing beside me in one image. Now there was empty space. That's when I started keeping copies of everything. Because I realized records weren't trustworthy. And if records weren't trustworthy, memory might not be either. The terrifying part wasn't seeing impossible things. It was watching reality quietly negotiate with itself afterward, and realizing it always seemed to settle on a version where nothing unusual had happened. Except I still remembered that I wish I could say that was the moment I decided to leave. Most people imagine that's how these stories work. You discover something impossible. You quit. You drive away. You survive. Real life isn't that clean. I still needed the paycheck. My lease still existed. My truck still needed repairs. And part of me had become invested. Not because I thought I could solve it. Because I needed to know whether I was losing my mind. There is a specific kind of fear that comes from not trusting your own memory. A lot of horror stories focus on external threats. This wasn't like that. The thing that kept me awake wasn't a creature. It was the possibility that everything happening had a perfectly ordinary explanation, and I was the only person failing to understand it. So I stayed. I started documenting everything outside facility systems. A notebook in my apartment, printed photographs, voice recordings. I avoided cloud storage, avoided work computers, avoided company networks. If records were changing, I wanted copies somewhere isolated. For a while that worked. Then the notebook started changing too. Not all at once. Small things. A sentence written in black, ink appearing in blue. Dates shifting by a day. References to room numbers I had never recorded. At first, I blamed exhaustion. Night shifts do strange things to people. You lose track of days. Meals become irregular. Sleep becomes fragmented. I was averaging 4 or 5 hours a night. Anyone would question themselves. Then I found an entry written in my own handwriting that I had absolutely no memory of creating. 3 lines. Nothing more. Room 41 moved again. Do not trust old maps. It knows when you're measuring. I stared at that page for nearly an hour. The handwriting was mine. No question. The pressure patterns matched. The shape of the letters matched. Even the way I crossed my sevens matched. Yet I had never written those words. At least I don't think I had. That's the problem. Eventually certainty begins slipping away. You stop asking whether something happened. You start asking whether you're still capable of knowing. The next major incident occurred 6 weeks later. A floodgate inspection required access to one of the oldest structures in the facility. Sector A, built in the 1950s, mostly unused. The place smelled different from newer sections. Wet concrete, rust, old machinery, like stepping into a building preserved inside a forgotten decade. I was checking pressure valves when I noticed a hallway extending beyond a maintenance room. A hallway that shouldn't have existed. I had the blueprint. I checked twice. The wall behind that room was supposed to border an exterior foundation. There was no available space beyond it. Yet the hallway stretched at least 50 feet into darkness. I stood there debating what to do. Part of me already knew the answer. Every strange event traced back to these impossible spaces. Walking away meant remaining ignorant. Walking forward meant risking whatever had happened to Blake. I took exactly 12 steps. I remember because I counted. At step 12, I reached a doorway. The room beyond looked ordinary. Almost aggressively ordinary. A desk, metal filing cabinets, fluorescent lighting, concrete floor, no windows. The kind of office you could find in any government facility in America. Except the room wasn't listed anywhere. The desk contained documents, maintenance logs, inspection reports, personnel files, thousands of pages, many older than the facility itself. That shouldn't have been possible. The dam project began in the 1950s. Some files were dated 1931, others 1918. One referenced an inspection occurring in a structure supposedly built 40 years later. The dates weren't wrong. The histories were, as if records from entirely different locations had somehow collected there. Then I found my own personnel file. That stopped me cold, because according to the file, I'd been employed at the facility for nearly 14 years. Not 8 months, 14 years. The document included performance reviews, promotion recommendations, disciplinary notes, medical evaluations, even photographs. Photographs I had never taken. Yet there I was, older in some images, younger in others, standing beside people I didn't recognize, inside rooms I'd never seen. One picture showed me smiling next to a steel door labeled Room 41, the same number from the notebook entry. I heard footsteps before I could examine further. Not running, walking, steady, approaching from somewhere deeper in the structure. I left immediately. The hallway behind me felt longer than before. That sounds ridiculous, but I remember walking much farther returning than entering. By the time I reached the maintenance room, my heart was hammering. I looked back once. The hallway was gone. Just a concrete wall. No opening. No doorway. Nothing. The personnel file disappeared too. The photo I'd taken on my phone became corrupted before sunrise. A black image. No metadata. No timestamp. Just darkness. When I reported sick the following day, nobody questioned it. I spent 12 hours in my apartment reviewing everything I collected. The pattern finally became visible. The legacy rooms weren't stationary. They migrated. Not physically, conceptually. 1 month a room appeared beneath Sector C. Later the same room emerged near Sector F. Then inside an abandoned storage structure. Different locations. Same dimensions. Same internal layout. The rooms behaved less like architecture and more like a condition affecting architecture. Like a disease moving through buildings. And wherever they appeared, records changed afterward. Blueprints rewrote themselves. Personnel history shifted. Memories became unreliable. People disappeared. Not dramatically, quietly, administratively, as though reality itself completed revised paperwork. I considered contacting journalists, government agencies, someone, anyone. But how do you report something like that? What evidence existed? Photos vanished. Documents altered themselves. Witnesses forgot. The story sounded insane even to me. Then Harris approached me, the technician who had first mentioned the legacy rooms. He found me during a night shift and handed me a folded piece of paper. No explanation, just walked away. The paper contained a hand-drawn map, several circles, several dates, one sentence. They aren't sealing the rooms. I read it 3 times. Then turn the page over. More writing. Smaller. Rushed. There's ceiling access points. That distinction changed everything. Because until then, I'd assumed the rooms were being contained. Dangerous places locked away from workers. But what if that wasn't the purpose? What if the rooms couldn't be contained? What if the locks existed simply to slow people down, to discourage entry, to reduce exposure? Suddenly, every sealed door made sense. Not prisons, warning signs. And if Harris was right, the facility itself wasn't the source. It was only one location among many. The map confirmed that fear. Several circles appeared across different states. Missouri, Nebraska, Colorado, Oklahoma, old reservoirs, power stations, water treatment plants, infrastructure sites. Every location connected through historical construction records. And every location contained reports of architectural inconsistencies dating back decades. The rooms weren't local. They were spreading, or maybe migrating. I don't know which word fits better. What I do know is that the dates formed a sequence, one that seemed to predict future appearances, including one scheduled for less than 2 weeks away. And my facility, Sector B, underground, I should have ignored it. Instead, I waited, because by then curiosity had become something worse. Obsession. The predicted date arrived during a quiet Tuesday shift. No storms, no alarms, nothing unusual, just fluorescent lights humming above concrete corridors. Around 2:17 a.m., I reached the marked location, an empty wall, exactly as expected. I stood there for nearly an hour. Nothing happened. I felt stupid, embarrassed. Then I noticed the sound, a faint metallic vibration, not from machinery, from behind the wall, almost like distant construction. The concrete surface trembled, very slightly. Hairline cracks appeared, then disappeared, not repaired, gone, as if the wall couldn't decide what shape it should be. And slowly, impossibly, a doorway emerged. Not opening, forming. Concrete became steel. Flat surface became recessed frame. The door simply existed where seconds earlier there had been none. I don't know how long I stood frozen. Maybe a minute, maybe 10. The clock on my phone later showed gaps I couldn't explain. What I remember clearly is the number painted across the steel. The same number from the personnel file. The notebook. The photograph. Room 41. The handle turned before I touched it. And the door opened inward. Slowly. Invitingly. Like it had been expecting me that I didn't go in right away. That's important. I stood there long enough for my body to start doing that thing it does when it thinks you're about to do something irreversible. Dry mouth. Tight chest. A kind of static in the hands that makes everything feel slightly unreal. The door stayed open. No wind came from inside. No sound spilled out either. Just a kind of neutral silence, like the air itself had been removed of anything worth listening to. I remember thinking very plainly that I could still walk away and no one would ever know I had stood there. No camera in that corridor. No supervisor nearby. No reason anyone would check that exact section at that exact time. That thought should have been enough. It wasn't, because I had already seen too much to pretend the door didn't matter anymore. Room 41 wasn't just another anomaly at that point. It felt like a conclusion I hadn't been told the beginning to. So I stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was that the temperature didn't change the way you expect it to. Usually when you enter a sealed space underground, you feel something immediate. Dampness, cold, stagnant air. This felt regulated, balanced, like the room was actively maintaining a condition. The second thing I noticed was that the interior didn't match the facility outside. Not in a dramatic way, in a subtle way that made it worse. The walls were concrete, yes, but too smooth, too finished, like they had been poured and sanded by someone who cared about. Symmetry more than utility. The lighting was fluorescent, but softer than ours. Less flicker, less hum, almost calm. There were filing cabinets along one wall, a desk in the center, and behind the desk, a corkboard covered in layered documents, not pinned randomly, organized, precise, like someone had spent years trying to make sense of something that kept changing while they looked at it. I took a few steps forward and immediately noticed something else. The room reacted, not physically, subtly. The lighting adjusted as I moved deeper. Not brighter, more focused, as if a space was narrowing its attention onto me. That's the closest way I can describe it without sounding insane. The desk had a single folder placed in the center. No label, just my handwriting on the cover. I didn't remember writing it, but I recognized the shape of the letters instantly. My fingers didn't want to touch it. That feeling again. Not fear exactly. Something more primitive. Like my body recognizing a condition my mind hadn't fully processed yet. I opened it anyway. Inside were logs. Not facility logs. My logs. Entries I had made over the last months. The same notebook I kept at home. Except these were older. Expanded. Corrected. Some entries had annotations in the margins in a handwriting that was almost mine, but slightly more certain. Like me, if I had stopped hesitating. The first page made my stomach drop. It described my first day at the facility. Except it didn't describe what actually happened. It described what should have happened if I had been properly integrated. Orientation details I never received. A supervisor briefing I never attended. A corridor map I had never been shown. And at the bottom of the page, a line that made my throat tighten. Subject retains partial resistance to spatial normalization. I put the folder down for a second, just to breathe, because the words didn't feel metaphorical. They felt procedural, like I was reading a case file. About myself. The corkboard behind the desk held something worse. Maps, not of the facility as it existed, but as it was remembered. Different versions layered over each other with translucent sheets. Corridors overlapping corridors. Rooms existing in multiple positions at once. And in the center of it all, highlighted in red, were the legacy rooms. All of them connected by thin lines. Not random, directional, as if they weren't just locations, but pathways, routes, movement points. I realized then that I had been thinking about this entirely wrong. I had assumed the rooms were anomalies inside the system, but the system might have been designed around them. Or worse, built to accommodate them as they moved. A sound came from behind me, a chair shifting. I turned, no one there, but the chair at the desk was now slightly pulled back, just a few centimeters, as if someone had been sitting there a moment ago and stood up quietly when I wasn't looking. My first instinct was to leave. Not run, just leave. But when I turned toward the door, it wasn't where it had been. The wall behind me was solid. No seam, no handle, no outline, just concrete, freshly smooth, like the door had never existed. I checked again, walked the perimeter, touched every surface. Nothing. That's when I started to understand something I didn't want to accept. Room 41 wasn't a place you entered and exited. It was a state you were held in until something resolved. I went back to the desk. The folder had changed while I wasn't looking. I know how that sounds, but I'm not exaggerating. Pages had shifted order. New pages were present that I hadn't seen before, and one of them contained a current entry. Time-stamped, written in real time as I stood there. It read, "Subject is currently inside assessment chamber. Monitoring stabilization." Below that, another line appeared as I read it. "Do not attempt exit via standard egress." I looked up immediately. The corkboard had changed too. One of the maps now showed a small dot. Moving. It wasn't labeled at first. Then, slowly, text appeared beside it. My location. I stepped back instinctively. The room responded. The lighting dimmed slightly. Not threatening. Corrective. Like it was adjusting to my reaction. That's when I heard footsteps again. Closer this time. Not behind me. Inside the room. But not tied to any visible source. Just the sound of someone walking across concrete from an angle I couldn't place. Then a voice. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just conversational. Close enough that it felt like it didn't need to raise itself to be heard. "You're later than expected." I turned slowly. Nothing there. But the corkboard had updated again. A new sheet had been added. A photograph. Me, standing in the corridor outside room 41. Taken from above. From an angle that didn't exist in that space. The timestamp on the image was current. As I stood there, looking at it, I felt something I can only describe as administrative awareness. Not fear of a monster. Fear of classification. Like I was no longer a person experiencing something. I was a variable inside a system being evaluated for correction. The voice spoke again. Same tone, same proximity. You've been inconsistent for a long time. I finally asked the question out loud. What is this place? The answer didn't come immediately. Instead, the room did something subtle. All at once, the maps on the corkboard aligned, different layers snapping into a single configuration. For a brief moment, I saw the facility not as buildings, but as a connected structure of repeating chambers. Legacy rooms weren't scattered. They were nodes. And the facility itself was just one section of something much larger that extended far beyond what any blueprint could represent. Then the voice answered, not directly, more like a correction to my question. This is where inconsistencies are resolved. The word resolved lingered in the air longer than the rest. I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I almost didn't check it, but I did. No signal, no messages, just a single new photo in my gallery. It showed me again, but not inside the room. Outside, standing in my apartment kitchen, looking directly into the camera. That's when the corkboard changed one final time. All the maps faded except one. A simple line, connecting room 41 to dozens of other marked points across the country. And slowly, new points began appearing, unlabeled at first, then resolving into names of places I recognized. Facilities, stations, plants, buildings with underground infrastructure, all of them gaining a small notation beside them. Access confirmed. The voice spoke one last time, very close now. Not behind me anymore, not above me, just present. You didn't find room 41. You reopened it. The door reappeared behind me, as if it had been there the entire time. I didn't turn around right away, because I already knew what I would see, and I already knew it wouldn't matter whether I left or stayed. Because the last thing I understood before everything shifted again was this. Room 41 wasn't where I worked. It was where I had been assigned from the beginning, and I don't think I ever left it at all.